The night Mara Whitlock aimed a rifle at three armed men, she wasn't thinking about survival. She was thinking about how nobody had ever asked her what she wanted. Not her mother, who saw her as free labor. Not her sister, who needed her invisible. Not the town that looked right through her like she was smoke. But when Gideon Cross rode into her life and saw what nobody else could see, everything shattered. This is the story of a woman who refused to stay unseen, even if it meant burning down everything she'd been told to protect. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from, so I can see how far this story travels. The Wyoming wind came mean that October, cutting through the gaps in the trading post walls like it had a personal grudge. Mara Whitlock didn't notice anymore. She'd stopped feeling the cold the same winter her father died, when she realized nobody was going to step up and keep this place breathing except her. She was in the stockroom, inventory ledger balanced on a crate of spoiled flour they couldn't afford to throw out, but couldn't sell either. The numbers swam in the lamplight. 2 months behind on the land payment. The roof needed patching before snow came, and Samuel Pritchard, their main supplier from Cheyenne, had started charging interest rates that would make a loan shark blush. "Mara!" Her mother's voice pierced through the wall, sharp, impatient. Mara didn't look up. "What?" "Come help your sister with her hair. The Johnsons are coming for supper." "I'm doing the books." "The books can wait. Clara needs to look proper." Mara's pencil scratched across the page. Revenue minus expenses. The number that resulted wasn't revenue at all. It was a countdown. "The books are telling me we'll be out of business by Christmas if we don't figure something out. Clara's hair isn't going to fix that." Silence. Then footsteps, hard and deliberate. Her mother appeared in the doorway, flour dust streaking her dark dress, mouth pressed into that familiar line of disappointment. Elizabeth Whitlock had been beautiful once. You could still see it in the bones of her face, the set of her shoulders. But the frontier had a way of taking beauty and wringing it dry, leaving only the skeleton of what used to be. Now she saved all the softness for Clara, poured it into her youngest daughter like water into cracked earth, hoping something lovely would grow. "Your sister," Elizabeth said, voice tight, "needs to make an impression. Thomas Johnson is 23, owns land, and his family has money. Real money. Thomas Johnson has the personality of wet rope. Thomas Johnson is a prospect, and Clara won't get many more of those if she doesn't what? Look perfect? Act perfect? Marry perfect?" Mara finally met her mother's eyes. "She's 17, Ma. I was 16 when I married your father. And look how that worked out." The slap came fast, not hard enough to really hurt, but sharp enough to sting. They stared at each other in the dim stockroom surrounded by barrels of dried beans and sacks of grain that might or might not last the winter. Elizabeth's hand dropped. "Your father was a good man. He was a dreamer who died owing money to half of Wyoming. Get upstairs. Help your sister." Mara stood, joints stiff from sitting on the cold floor. She was taller than her mother now, had been for 2 years. Broader through the shoulders, stronger. Not that it mattered. In this house, strength counted for nothing if you couldn't fold it into something pretty and marriageable. She found Clara upstairs in the room they shared, sitting at the battered vanity their mother had hauled across 3 territories. Clara was crying quietly, the way she always did, tears sliding down perfect cheekbones without disturbing the rest of her face. "He's going to be awful," Clara whispered. Mara picked up the brush. Clara's hair was the color of honey in sunlight, thick and smooth. Nothing like Mara's, which was brown and stubborn and never did what it was told. "Probably. I don't want to marry him." "Then don't." Ma says a lot of things." Mara worked the brush through a tangle, gentle, despite the frustration burning in her chest. "Doesn't mean you have to listen." Clara turned, eyes red. "What else am I supposed to do? I can't run the post like you. I can't do numbers or bargain with suppliers I'm not built for that." "You're built for exactly what you want to be built for. The rest is just what people tell you." "Easy for you to say. You don't have to worry about any of this." Mara's hand stilled. "Right, because I'm so free. You know what I mean." The thing was, Mara did know. Clara wasn't cruel. She was just scared, and fear made people blind. Made them look at Mara and see a solution instead of a person, see capable hands instead of tired ones, see someone who could carry weight instead of someone who might want to put it down. Your hair looks fine, Mara said. I need to finish inventory. She left before Clara could apologize. She was tired of apologies that never changed anything. The Johnsons arrived at 6. Thomas looked exactly like Mara remembered. Tall, bland, the kind of face you'd forget 5 minutes after meeting it. His father was worse, all business and roaming eyes that lingered too long on the cracks in the floor, the water stains on the ceiling, tallying up failure like a merchant counts coins. They sat in the cramped front room that served as both parlor and office, making small talk that circled the real conversation like vultures over roadkill. Clara perched on the settee, hands folded, looking like something out of a catalog. Elizabeth poured coffee they couldn't afford into cups that didn't match. Mara stayed in the back, watching through the curtain. "Beautiful home you have," Mr. Johnson said, lying through his teeth. Elizabeth smiled. "We manage. Must be difficult. A woman alone with 2 daughters. No man to handle the business side of things." "Mara handles the business just fine." Mr. Johnson's eyebrows rose. "The older girl? She has a head for figures?" "Better than most men I've known." "Fascinating." He said it the way you'd say unfortunate. "Still, there are certain decisions that require a masculine perspective. Negotiations, contracts, protection." Mara's jaw tightened. "We do what we need to do," Elizabeth said, voice cooling. "Of course. Of course. I only mean, well, a place like this would benefit from the right kind of partnership, the right kind of family connection." His gaze slid to Clara, then back to Elizabeth. "My Thomas is quite taken with your Clara. We'd be honored to discuss a more formal arrangement." There it was. The real reason for the visit, not supper, not neighborly courtesy, a transaction. Clara for security, beauty for survival. Clara's face went pale. Thomas looked at his boots. "That's very kind," Elizabeth said carefully. "Clara is young yet. We'd need time to consider—" "Time has a way of running out, Mrs. Whitlock. I've heard Samuel Pritchard isn't pleased with how slowly you've been paying his invoices. And winter's coming." Threat dressed up as concern. Mara had heard it before. Would probably hear it again. That was the frontier. Everyone looking for an angle, a weakness, a way to take what you had and call it help. She stepped through the curtain. "We'll have Pritchard paid by month's end." Foreheads turned. Mr. Johnson's expression flickered with something between surprise and dismissal. "Ah, the head for figures. That's right. And how do you plan to manage that? The payment, I mean, given the current state of your accounts." "That's not your concern." "Thomas." Mr. Johnson stood. "I think we've overstayed our welcome." Elizabeth rose quickly. "Please, I didn't mean—" "Mara, apologize." "For what?" "Mara." "No." Mara stayed planted. "We're not selling Clara to pay our debts. If that's what this visit was about, you can leave now." The room went silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Mr. Johnson's face hardened. "I see. Well, Mrs. Whitlock, when you're ready to discuss this matter seriously, with the adults in the room, you know where to find us. Good evening." They left. The door slammed. Elizabeth stood frozen, face white with rage and humiliation. "How dare you?" she breathed. "How dare I what? Tell the truth? You just destroyed your sister's best chance at a decent life." "That wasn't a chance, Ma. That was a cage." "You arrogant, selfish, do you have any idea what you've done? Any idea what happens to us if we lose this place?" "I'm trying to save this place." "By insulting the only family in 50 miles with money and connections? By making enemies we can't afford to have?" "They were never going to help us. They were going to swallow us whole and call it charity." Elizabeth's hand rose again. This time Mara caught her wrist. They stood there frozen. Mother and daughter. 2 women who loved each other and didn't know how to stop hurting each other. "Let go," Elizabeth whispered. Mara did. Elizabeth pulled back, straightening her collar, rebuilding the wall. "Do what you want," she said quietly. "You always do. But when this falls apart, don't expect me to pick up the pieces." She walked upstairs. A door closed. Then silence. Clara emerged from the parlor, eyes wide. "Mara, don't. I didn't want— I would have said no. Eventually. You didn't have to." "I know." "Then why?" "Because someone had to." Mara grabbed her coat from the hook. "I'm going to check the barn." Outside, the wind hit like a fist. Stars scattered across the black sky, cold and distant. The barn crouched at the edge of the property, dark except for the single lantern she'd left burning. Inside, it smelled like hay and horse and the particular kind of quiet that came from being alone with animals who didn't expect anything from you except food and water and the occasional kind word. Mara leaned against the stall door, letting her head fall back against the wood. Her hands were shaking. From anger or fear or exhaustion, she couldn't tell anymore. Maybe all three. "You look like you could use a drink." She spun. A man stood in the doorway, backlit by moonlight, tall, broad-shouldered, leading a horse that looked like it had covered serious ground. "We're closed," Mara said. "Sign out front says trading post." "Sign's old. Come back tomorrow." He stepped inside anyway. The lantern light caught his face, rough-hewn, weathered, with eyes that were too sharp for comfort. 40, maybe. Hard to tell with men who lived outdoors. He wore range clothes, dusty from travel, and a gun belt that sat easy on his hips like it belonged there. "Name's Gideon Cross," he said. "I'm looking for supplies. Horse needs grain, I need coffee and ammunition, and if you've got a bottle of anything that doesn't taste like kerosene, I'll pay extra." "I said we're closed." "I heard you. I also heard you tell those folks inside that you'd have your supplier paid by month's end. That kind of confidence usually means you're planning to make some sales." He glanced around the barn, taking in the half-empty shelves visible through the open door to the stockroom. "Or you're a hell of a liar." Mara studied him. There was something different in the way he looked at her. Not through her, not past her to something more interesting. At her, direct, steady. 20 pounds of grain," she said finally. "Coffee's 50 cents a pound. Ammunition depends on caliber, and the only bottle I've got is whiskey my father hid in the rafters 3 years ago. It'll either cure you or kill you." Gideon smiled. It changed his whole face. "I'll risk it." She led him inside through the back entrance to avoid her mother. The trading post floor was a mess of contradictions, organized chaos that somehow made sense if you knew where to look. Mara knew where everything was. She'd reorganized it twice since her father died, trying to make the inventory stretch, trying to make the empty spaces look intentional. She filled a sack with grain while Gideon browsed. He moved like someone comfortable in his own skin, no wasted motion. Picked up a tin of coffee, checked the price tag, set it down. Examined a knife display. Ran his thumb along the blade of a folding knife with a bone handle. "This is quality," he said. "My father bought those in St. Louis before he stopped being able to afford St. Louis." "What happened to him?" "Died owing money he didn't have to pay debts he shouldn't have made." Gideon set the knife down carefully. "You always this honest with strangers?" "You asked." "Most people would have said something polite. Illness. Accident." "Most people lie more than I do." He laughed. Actually laughed. "I'll take the knife. And the coffee. And that whiskey you mentioned." Mara climbed the ladder to the rafters, found the bottle wedged between 2 support beams. Dust coated the glass. She wiped it clean and climbed down, handing it over. Gideon examined the label. "This is good whiskey. My father had good taste, just bad judgment." "There's a difference?" "Usually." He paid in silver coin, real money, not the credit notes most customers tried to use. Mara counted it twice, making sure it was real. "You don't trust easy," Gideon observed. "Can't afford to." "Smart." He gathered his purchases. "You run this place yourself?" "My mother owns it. I keep it from falling apart." "There's a difference?" She almost smiled. "Usually." He paused at the door, horse's reins in hand. "That business with the Johnsons earlier, I couldn't help overhearing through the walls." Mara's guard went up. "That's private." "I'm sure it is. I'm also sure you just made an enemy who's going to tell Samuel Pritchard exactly what kind of attitude you've got. Pritchard's not a forgiving man." "You know Pritchard?" "I know his type. They're all the same. Find someone struggling, offer help with hooks in it, then reel you in slow until you're drowning." Gideon met her eyes. "You really think you can pay him off by month's end?" "I don't know, but I'm going to try." Something shifted in his expression. Respect, maybe. Or recognition. "You need help. I'm camped about 3 miles north. Follow the creek to where it splits. Can't miss it." "Why would you help me?" "Maybe I won't. Maybe I'm just letting you know where to find me if you change your mind about being so damn stubborn." He left before she could respond. The sound of hooves faded into the night. Mara stood alone in the trading post, surrounded by the smell of dust and old leather and her father's failures. The coins from Gideon's purchase sat heavy in her palm. Real money. Honest transaction. It felt like possibility. It felt dangerous. 3 days passed. Mara worked the numbers until her eyes burned, looking for a solution that didn't exist. They were bleeding money. The roof leaked in 2 places now. A wagon wheel had cracked and needed replacing, and Samuel Pritchard sent a messenger with a note that made her blood go cold. Payment due in full. 2 weeks. No exceptions. Shorter than she'd thought. Harder than she'd hoped. She was in the yard, trying to fix the wagon wheel with materials they couldn't spare, when riders appeared on the horizon. 4 of them. Moving fast. Pritchard's men. She recognized the lead rider, a man named Vance, who'd been there the last time Pritchard came personally to remind them about the debt. Mara stood, wiping grease from her hands. Her mother came out onto the porch, Clara behind her. The riders circled the yard, kicking up dust. Vance dismounted, smiling the way wolves smiled before they bit. "Mrs. Whitlock, ladies, beautiful day." "What do you want?" Mara asked. "Just delivering a message from Mr. Pritchard. He's concerned about the timeline on your payment. Thinks maybe we need to discuss alternative arrangements." "The payment's coming." "That's what you said last time. And the time before that." Vance walked toward the porch, boots heavy on the steps. "Mr. Pritchard's a patient man, but patience has limits. He's thinking maybe it's time to put this property up for auction. Cover the debt that way." Elizabeth went white. "You can't. We have time. The note says 2 weeks. But Mr. Pritchard's worried you might do something stupid in those 2 weeks. Run off. Burn the place for insurance. Who knows?" Vance shrugged. "So he's accelerating the timeline. Payment in full by Friday, or we start seizure proceedings." "That's 3 days," Mara said. "Smart girl. Good with numbers." Vance grinned. "Unless you've got $3,000 hidden somewhere, I'd suggest you start packing." 3,000. It might as well have been 3 million. Mara's mind raced. Assets, inventory, anything they could sell fast enough to make a dent, but even liquidating everything wouldn't cover half. "There's another option," Vance said, voice going soft. "Dangerous. Mr. Pritchard mentioned he might be willing to forgive the debt entirely. Call it even. Fresh start." "In exchange for what?" Elizabeth asked. Vance's gaze slid to Clara, lingered. "No," Mara said. "Didn't offer it to you." Vance kept his eyes on Clara. "Your sister's a pretty thing. Mr. Pritchard's got a son about her age. Could be a good match. Beneficial for both families." Clara shrank back. Elizabeth's face twisted with something awful. Fear mixed with calculation, mixed with desperation. "No," Mara repeated, louder. "You don't get a vote, sweetheart. This is between your mother and Mr. Pritchard." "My daughter is not for sale," Elizabeth said, but her voice shook. "Everything's for sale, Mrs. Whitlock. You just need to be desperate enough." Vance tipped his hat. 3 days. Think about it. Think real hard about what happens when you lose this place. Where you'll go. How you'll survive. Then think about whether your pride's worth more than your daughter's future." They rode off, leaving dust and silence. Elizabeth sank onto the porch step. Clara was crying again, quiet and helpless. Mara stood in the yard, hands clenched, something hot and furious building in her chest. This was it. The moment her mother had been terrified of. The moment when all the careful planning and desperate hoping collapsed into impossible choices. Clara for the trading post. Beauty for survival. "Mara," Elizabeth whispered, "what do we do?" For the first time in years, her mother was asking. Actually asking, looking at Mara like she might have an answer. Mara thought about Gideon Cross, about his offer, about the camp 3 miles north where the creek split. "I need to go somewhere," she said. "Where?" "To find help." "From who?" Mara grabbed her coat. "Someone who sees things different." She found the camp exactly where Gideon said it would be. A small fire, a bedroll, a horse picketed nearby. Gideon sat with his back against a tree, cleaning his rifle with the kind of attention that spoke to years of habit. He looked up as Mara approached. Didn't seem surprised. "Figured you'd show up eventually," he said. "You knew about Pritchard." About what he'd do. I know how men like him operate. Squeeze until you break, then act like they're doing you a favor picking up the pieces. Gideon set the rifle aside. What did he offer? My sister, for the debt. And you're here instead of agreeing. That took guts. That took not having a choice. If I don't find another way, my mother will say yes. Gideon studied her. What kind of help are you looking for? I don't know. Money, time, a miracle. Mara's voice cracked. Something. Anything. I'm not a bank. I know. And I'm not a miracle worker. I know that too. So what exactly do you think I can do? Mara met his eyes. You said you know Pritchard's type. That means you've dealt with them before. That means you know how to fight them. Gideon was quiet for a long moment. The fire crackled. Somewhere, a nightbird called. Fighting costs, he said finally. I'll pay whatever it costs. You don't have anything to pay with. Then I'll owe you. I'll work it off, however long it takes. You're offering to indenture yourself to a stranger to save a failing business and a sister who will probably marry someone like Thomas Johnson anyway. Mara flinched. She's still my sister. And the trading post? What's that worth saving? It's all we have. That's not an answer. It's my answer. Gideon stood, brushing off his pants. He was taller than she'd remembered. Solid. The kind of man who could back up whatever he said with action. I'll make you a deal, he said. I've got a ranch about 40 miles west. Good land. Water rights. I run cattle, some horses. Business is good, but I could use help with the bookkeeping side. Someone who's got a head for numbers and doesn't spook easy. You want to hire me? I want to offer you a way out. You come work for me, I'll pay you enough to cover your family's debt to Pritchard, plus room and board. You give me 6 months of honest work, we'll call it even. It was too good. Too easy. Why? Because I've been where you are, stuck between bad choices and worse ones. Someone gave me a hand up once. Figure I'll pass it along. That's not a reason. It's the only one you're getting. Mara's mind spun. 6 months. A way to save the trading post without selling Clara, without giving Pritchard what he wanted. It felt like a trap, but it also felt like the only rope being thrown into the pit. My mother won't agree to it, she said. She'll say it's not proper. A young woman working on a ranch full of men. It's a ranch full of cattle and 3 ranch hands who are old enough to be your grandfather, and I'll have my housekeeper draw up a proper contract, everything legal and binding. And after 6 months? After 6 months, you're free to go. Debt paid. No strings. Just like that. Just like that. Mara looked back toward where the trading post lay in the darkness. She thought about her mother's desperate face, Clara's tears, Vance's predatory smile. She thought about being invisible, about being the backbone nobody thanked, about every door that had ever closed in her face because she wasn't pretty enough, soft enough, quiet enough. I'll do it, she said, but I want the money up front. I want to pay Pritchard myself. Gideon raised an eyebrow. You don't trust me to handle it? I don't trust anyone to handle it. This is my family, my problem. I'll fix it. For the first time, Gideon smiled at her like an equal, like he saw exactly what she was and respected it. All right, he said, we ride to town tomorrow. I'll front the money, you pay Pritchard personally, then we head to the ranch and you start working off the debt. He held out his hand. Mara took it. His grip was firm, calloused, real. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me yet. You haven't seen the books. They rode into town at noon the next day. Mara had left a note for her mother, terse, factual, explaining the deal. Elizabeth would be furious. Or relieved. Probably both. It didn't matter anymore. Pritchard's office sat above the general store, a second-floor room that reeked of cigar smoke and self-importance. Vance was there, along with Pritchard himself, a heavy man with soft hands and eyes like a shark. Miss Whitlock, Pritchard said, surprised, I didn't expect to see you here. I'm here to settle our account. Is that right? And how exactly do you plan to... Mara dropped the money on his desk. 3,000 in banknotes, crisp and real. Gideon stood behind her, silent support. Pritchard's eyes widened. Where did you get this? That's not your concern. We had a debt. I'm paying it, in full. As of right now, you have no claim on our property. Now hold on. No. Mara's voice cut through his bluster. You sent your man to threaten my family, to suggest selling my sister like livestock. That's done. We don't owe you anything. Not money, not respect, nothing. Pritchard's face went red. You watch your mouth, girl. I could make things very difficult for... Try it, Gideon said quietly. See what happens. The room went still. Pritchard looked at Gideon, really looked at him, and something in his expression changed, calculation replacing bluster. Mr. Cross, I didn't realize you were involved in this situation. I'm involved in making sure Miss Whitlock isn't cheated out of what's hers. The debt's paid. You'll provide a receipt and a release of lien today. Of course, of course. Pritchard scrambled for paper. Vance, draw up the paperwork. 10 minutes later, Mara walked out with documentation that made her hands shake. The trading post was theirs, free and clear. Outside, the sun felt brighter. The air tasted different. How does it feel? Gideon asked. Strange, Mara said, like I'm waiting for it to fall apart. It won't. You made sure of that. We made sure of that. No. Gideon looked at her directly. This was you. I just provided the money. You provided the spine. They rode back to the trading post to collect Mara's things. Elizabeth was waiting on the porch, face unreadable. Ma, Mara started, I read your note. I know it's not... You saved us. Elizabeth's voice broke. You saved Clara. You saved all of us. I made a deal. I have to go work it off. I know. Elizabeth stepped forward, pulled Mara into a hug that felt awkward and desperate and real. I'm sorry for everything, for not seeing you, for not... She pulled back, eyes wet. You're stronger than I ever was. Don't forget that. Clara appeared in the doorway. You're really leaving. For 6 months, then I'll be back. Things won't be the same. No, Mara agreed. They won't. She packed her few belongings, clothes, her father's old ledger, a book of poetry Clara had given her years ago. Not much to show for 21 years of life, but it was hers. Gideon waited with the horses. As Mara mounted, she took one last look at the trading post, the sagging porch, the crooked sign, the home that had never quite felt like home. Then she turned her horse west, toward whatever came next, toward being seen, toward being free. The wind cut across the open plain, cold and sharp, carrying the scent of sage and distance. Mara didn't look back. Some doors, once you walked through them, you couldn't go back. Didn't want to go back. This was one of those doors. And for the first time in her life, Mara Whitlock was choosing to walk through it with her eyes wide open. The ranch appeared at sunset on the 3rd day of riding. Mara had expected something rough, a cabin, maybe a barn, the bare minimum a single man would need to survive. What she found instead made her pull her horse to a stop. The main house sat solid against the hillside, 2 stories of timber and stone with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Outbuildings dotted the property, a barn that could hold 30 horses easy, a bunkhouse, a smokehouse, corrals that stretched toward distant grazing land where cattle moved like dark shadows against the grass. This wasn't a ranch. This was an empire someone had carved out of raw wilderness through sheer, stubborn will. You didn't mention you were rich, Mara said. Gideon dismounted, leading his horse toward the barn. I'm not rich. I just work hard. There's a difference between working hard and owning half of Wyoming. 300 acres isn't half of Wyoming, and most of it's mortgaged. He glanced back at her. You getting down, or are you planning to sleep in the saddle? Mara slid off her horse, legs stiff from days of riding. A woman emerged from the house, 50-something, gray hair pulled back severe, wearing an apron and an expression that said she'd heard every excuse and believed none of them. This is Mrs. Brennan, Gideon said. She runs the house. What she says goes. Mrs. Brennan looked Mara up and down with the efficiency of someone evaluating livestock. She's scrawny. She's capable. We'll see. Mrs. Brennan turned back toward the house. Supper's in an hour. I'll show you your room after you've cleaned the trail dust off. You smell like horse. Mara followed her inside. The house was cleaner than she expected, furnished with pieces that had clearly been hauled from somewhere civilized and arranged by someone who cared about making a place feel like home. Not fancy, but solid, real. Her room was on the 2nd floor, small but private. A bed, a dresser, a window that looked out over the grazing land. Better than the cramped space she'd shared with Clara. Better than anything she'd had a right to expect. "Mr. Cross says you're here to work off a debt," Mrs. Brennan said from the doorway. "That's right. What kind of work?" "Bookkeeping, accounts, whatever needs organizing." Mrs. Brennan's expression softened slightly. "The books are a disaster. Mr. Cross is good at ranching. He's terrible at paperwork. Last man who tried to help him quit after 3 weeks." "I won't quit." "We'll see," Mrs. Brennan said again. "Wash up. Don't be late." Supper was served in a dining room that could seat 12 but currently held 5. Gideon at the head, Mara to his right, and 3 ranch hands who introduced themselves as Jesse, Thomas, and Red. All 3 looked old enough to be grandfathers, just like Gideon promised. They ate with the focused intensity of men who worked physical labor and needed fuel, not conversation. "Miss Whitlock's going to be handling the books," Gideon said between bites. "She'll need access to everything. Invoices, contracts, sale records, the whole mess." Jesse, the oldest of the 3, raised an eyebrow. "The whole mess? That'll take her till next summer." "Then she's got plenty to keep her busy." After supper, Gideon led Mara to what he generously called an office. It was more like a cemetery for murdered paperwork. Stacks of invoices covered the desk, most of them stained with coffee or dirt, or what might have been blood. Ledgers lay open at random pages. A filing cabinet sat in the corner with drawers that didn't close properly, stuffed so full that papers stuck out like broken teeth. Mara stared. "How long has it been like this?" 2 years, maybe 3. "How are you still in business?" "I'm good at the ranching part. The rest..." Gideon shrugged. "I've been ignoring it and hoping it would fix itself." "That's not how paperwork works." "I'm starting to figure that out." He pulled open one of the desk drawers, revealing more chaos. "You wanted honest work. Here it is. I need to know what I owe, what people owe me, and whether I'm making money or just bleeding it slow." Mara picked up the nearest invoice. It was dated 18 months ago, from a feed supplier in Cheyenne, marked paid, but with no record of when or how much. She set it down and picked up another. Same problem. And another. All of it incomplete, contradictory, useless. "This is going to take months to sort out," she said. "You've got 6. "I might need all of them." Gideon smiled. "Then you'd better get started." The first week was brutal. Mara worked from sunrise until her eyes wouldn't focus anymore, sorting paper into piles that made sense, paid, unpaid, disputed, incomprehensible. She created systems, built spreadsheets in the ledgers Gideon had abandoned, cross-referenced invoices against bank statements that were missing half their pages. Mrs. Brennan brought meals to the office when Mara forgot to come to the dining room. The ranch hands learned to knock before entering because Mara had a habit of throwing things when interrupted mid-calculation. By the end of the second week, patterns started emerging. The ranch was profitable, but barely. Gideon had been letting customers slide on payments, extending credit to people who never intended to pay it back. Good heart, bad business. The kind of mistakes her father had made. "You're being cheated," Mara said one evening when Gideon stopped by to check her progress. He leaned against the doorframe. "By who?" "Half your customers. This one," she held up an invoice, "ordered $300 worth of cattle 8 months ago. Promised payment in 60 days. You've got nothing showing he ever paid." "Jim Hutchins, he had a rough season. I told him to pay when he could." "That's not how business works. It's how neighbors work." "Neighbors don't take advantage. This is taking advantage." Mara pulled out another stack. "And it's not just him. You've got 12 accounts over 90 days past due. Combined, they owe you almost $4,000. Gideon went still. 4,000. "That's more than my family's debt to Pritchard. You're sitting on it like it doesn't matter." "These are people I know. People who've had bad luck. Bad luck doesn't last 8 months. At some point, it becomes bad character." Mara stood, facing him directly. "You want me to fix your books? I need permission to collect what's owed. All of it. Some of those people can't pay. Then they shouldn't have taken what they couldn't afford." Gideon studied her. "You're hard." "I'm practical. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yes. Being hard means not caring. Being practical means caring enough to make sure you survive so you can keep helping people who actually deserve it." She softened slightly. "You can't save everyone, Gideon. And you can't run a ranch on goodwill and I owe us. He was quiet for a long moment. Outside, night sounds filtered through the window. Cattle lowing, wind in the grass, the distant bark of a dog. All right, he said finally. Collect what's owed, but do it fair. I'm always fair. I believe you. The next week, Mara rode out with Jesse to start making collections. Their first stop was Jim Hutchins' place, 15 miles east. The property looked worse than the trading post had. Fences down, barn listing, fields gone to weeds. Hutchins himself answered the door, unshaven and suspicious. What do you want? I'm here on behalf of Gideon Cross, Mara said. You owe him $300 for cattle purchased last spring. I know what I owe. Times are tough. Times have been tough for 8 months. That's long enough. Hutchins' face reddened. You tell Cross to come collect himself if he's got a problem. Mr. Cross sent me because he's busy running his ranch, the one he can't properly maintain because people like you don't pay what they owe. Listen here, girl. I'm listening, and what I'm hearing is excuses. Mara pulled out the invoice. You have 2 options. Pay in full within 30 days, or we take equivalent value in livestock. Your choice. That's stealing. That's collecting a debt you agreed to. Big difference. Hutchins looked past her to Jesse, who sat on his horse looking bored. Cross really send you to do this? He sent me to fix his books, Mara said. This is me fixing them. They rode away with a promise of payment within the month. Mara marked it in her ledger, skeptical but hopeful. The next stop was worse. A man named Porter who owed for feed and supplies, over a year overdue. He met them at his gate with a shotgun. Get off my land! I'm here about your account with I know what you're here about, and I'm telling you to get gone before I make you gone. Jesse's hand drifted toward his rifle. Mara held up a hand, stopping him. Mr. Porter, she said calmly, I understand you're frustrated, but pointing a gun at me doesn't erase your debt. It just makes this harder for both of us. I don't owe Cross nothing. He overcharged me. Whole thing's a swindle. Do you have documentation of that? A receipt showing different prices? Don't need documentation. I know what I know. Then you know you signed an invoice agreeing to the charges. That makes it a legal debt. Mara kept her voice level. I'm willing to review the account. If there was an error, we'll correct it. But refusing to engage doesn't help you. You're not reviewing anything. You're leaving. Now. The shotgun didn't waver. Mara looked at it, then at Porter's face. Saw fear mixed with anger, mixed with desperation. Saw her mother's face the day the Johnsons came calling. Saw herself, backed into a corner with no good options. All right, she said. We're leaving. But this debt doesn't disappear. And next time it won't be me asking. It'll be the territorial marshal. They rode back in silence. Jesse finally spoke. That went well. He's scared. He's armed. People get armed when they're scared. Doesn't make it right, but it makes it understandable. Mara stared at the horizon. He probably can't pay. That's why he's acting like this. Easier to be angry than admit you failed. So what do? We document the refusal, we file it properly, and we move on to people who might actually pay. She glanced at Jesse. How many others are like Porter? Out of the 12? Maybe 4. So half will pay and half won't. That's about right. Mara did the math in her head. $2,000 recovered, $2,000 written off as bad debt. Better than nothing. Better than pretending the money would magically appear. Over the next month, she collected what she could. Some paid in cash, others in cattle or goods or labor. A few refused outright, and Mara documented everything with meticulous detail. By the time she returned to the ranch, the books were starting to look like actual books instead of organized chaos. Gideon reviewed her work in the office, nodding slowly. You recovered almost $2,000. Could have been more if people were honest. $2,000 is more than I expected. Hell, it's more than I've collected in 2 years. He closed the ledger. You're good at this. I'm just doing what needs doing. That's what makes you good at it. He leaned back in his chair. Most people can't separate what needs doing from what feels comfortable. You don't have that problem. I've never had the luxury of comfortable. Something shifted in his expression. No, I suppose you haven't. They sat in silence for a moment. Outside, rain started pattering against the window. The first real rain in weeks, turning the dust to mud. I have a proposition, Gideon said. There's a cattle auction in Laramie next month, big one. Buyers coming from 3 territories. I want to sell off some of my herd, but I need someone who can negotiate. Someone who won't get steamrolled by buyers looking for desperate sellers. You want me to negotiate? I want you to come with me and tell me when someone's trying to cheat me. I'll handle the talking. You handle the numbers. That's not bookkeeping. No. It's business. And you're better at business than anyone I've met. He met her eyes. What do you say? Mara thought about it. Thought about stepping outside the safe walls of the office into something bigger, riskier. Thought about the trading post and all the deals her father had botched because he couldn't tell a fair offer from a con. I'll do it, she said. But I need to understand your costs first. Can't negotiate if I don't know what we need to clear. Fair enough. They spent the next week going over every aspect of the ranch's finances. Feed costs, labor, land payments, equipment maintenance. Mara built spreadsheets showing break-even points, profit margins, risk factors. By the time they finished, she knew the ranch's finances better than Gideon did. The night before they left for Laramie, Mrs. Brennan cornered Mara in the hallway. You're going to the auction. That's right. Alone with Mr. Cross. And about 100 other ranchers. I don't think alone is the right word. Mrs. Brennan's expression didn't change. People will talk. Let them. It's not proper. Neither is letting someone cheat you because you're too worried about appearances to bring the person who knows your numbers. Mara met her eyes. I'm here to work. That's what I'm doing. He's starting to depend on you. Good. That's why he hired me. I don't mean the books. Mrs. Brennan's voice softened. I mean you. He looks at you different than he looks at other people. That's his business. It'll become yours if you're not careful. Mara didn't have an answer for that. Didn't want to examine too closely what Mrs. Brennan was suggesting, so she just nodded and went to her room to pack. They rode out at dawn, 2 days' travel to Laramie with an overnight camp in between. The weather held clear and cold. Gideon rode easy in the saddle, comfortable with silence. Mara found herself relaxing into the rhythm of it, hooves on hard ground, wind in the grass, the enormous sky overhead. You miss your family? Gideon asked on the second day. Sometimes. Just sometimes? Missing them and wanting to go back are different things. Fair point. He was quiet for a moment. You ever think about what you'll do after the 6 months? Not really. Seems like a long way off. It's halfway gone already. Mara realized he was right. 3 months had passed without her noticing. 3 months of work and routine and slowly building something that felt like competence, like purpose. I suppose I'll go back to the trading post, she said. Help my mother and Clara. That what you want? Doesn't matter what I want. It's what needs doing. There's that phrase again. Gideon glanced at her. You ever do something just because you want to, not because someone needs it or it's the responsible choice? Mara thought about it. Couldn't come up with an answer. No, she said finally. I guess I haven't. Might be worth trying sometime. Laramie appeared the next afternoon, bigger and louder than anything Mara had seen since leaving the trading post. The streets churned with ranchers and buyers, horses and cattle, the organized chaos of commerce happening at volume. The auction was held in a massive stockyard on the edge of town. Hundreds of cattle penned in sections, buyers walking the aisles examining livestock with critical eyes. Gideon registered his lot, 50 head of prime beef cattle, and they settled in to wait. The auction itself was a blur of noise and movement. The auctioneer's voice rose and fell in that strange rhythm that wasn't quite language, numbers flying faster than Mara could track. Gideon's lot came up third. Bidding started at $20 a head. Mara watched the buyers, saw who was interested, who was holding back, who was trying to look disinterested while clearly calculating. She'd seen the same expressions at the trading post, people trying to hide their interest to drive down prices. That one, she murmured to Gideon, nodding toward a man in an expensive coat. He wants them. He's trying not to show it. Gideon followed her gaze. Johnson, he's a broker out of Denver, buys for the railroads. He'll go higher. Don't take the first offer. The bidding climbed, 22, 25, 28. Johnson kept quiet, letting others drive the price up. At 30, the other bidders dropped out. Johnson raised his hand lazily. 31. The auctioneer looked around. 31 going once? Don't. Mara whispered. Gideon trusted her. Shook his head at the auctioneer. No sale. Johnson's expression flickered with surprise. The auctioneer hesitated. Mr. Cross, that's a fair price. It's below market, Mara said, loud enough to carry. And everyone here knows it. The crowd went quiet. Johnson turned, seeing Mara for the first time. And who are you? He asked. Someone who knows the difference between a fair price and a lowball offer. Johnson's smile was condescending. Little lady, I've been buying cattle for 20 years. I know what they're worth. Then you know these are worth 35 minimum. Top quality, grass-fed, perfect weight for slaughter or breeding. Mara stepped forward. You're trying to steal them because you think we're desperate. We're not. 31 is a generous offer. 31 is an insult. Johnson's smile hardened. You're making a mistake, Cross. Turn down my offer, you might not get another. Then I'll sell them somewhere else, Gideon said calmly. They walked away, leaving Johnson standing in the auction yard looking surprised and angry. Mara's heart hammered. She'd just told off a major buyer in front of 100 witnesses. Either it was the smartest thing she'd ever done, or the dumbest. That was risky, Gideon said when they were out of earshot. That was necessary. You sure about the price? I'm sure about not letting him cheat you. They found a buyer an hour later, a smaller operation out of Cheyenne. 34 ahead. Gideon shook hands on the deal while Mara documented everything in her ledger. $1,700. More than they'd hoped. More than Johnson had offered. As they left the stockyard, Johnson intercepted them. Cross, a word. Gideon stopped. Make it quick. I underestimated your cattle. And your... He glanced at Mara. Associate. I'm prepared to offer 35 ahead if you're willing to reconsider. Already sold, Gideon said. Break the contract. I'll make it worth your while. I don't break contracts. Johnson's expression went cold. You're making enemies, Cross. Bad business. I'm doing honest business. If that makes enemies, so be it. They walked away. Mara waited until they were clear before speaking. He's going to cause problems. Probably. You should have taken his offer. It was more money. It was also given for the wrong reasons. He didn't want the cattle. He wanted to prove he could make us back down. Gideon looked at her. You stood up to him. I'm not going to undercut that by crawling back now. Even if it costs you? Even then. That night, they stayed at a hotel in Laramie. Separate rooms, everything proper, but Mara couldn't sleep. She kept replaying the auction, the confrontation, the way Johnson's eyes had gone cold when Gideon refused him. She'd made an enemy today. Maybe they both had. But she'd also done something else. She'd stood in front of a crowd and spoken with authority. Had been listened to, respected, even if grudgingly. For the first time since leaving the trading post, Mara felt like she was becoming something more than what people expected her to be. It felt dangerous. It felt right. They rode back to the ranch the next morning, Gideon carrying a bank draft for $1,700, and Mara carrying the knowledge that she'd just changed something fundamental about how the world saw her, about how she saw herself. The ranch appeared on the horizon at sunset, solid and real. Home, almost. More than the trading post had ever been. Mrs. Brennan met them on the porch. How did it go? We sold at 34 ahead, Gideon said. Her eyebrows rose. Johnson was there. I assume he offered less. He did. And you turned him down. Mara turned him down. I just backed her up. Mrs. Brennan looked at Mara with something that might have been approval. Well, I suppose that's that then. That's what? Mara asked. You're not just working here anymore. You're part of this place. Mrs. Brennan went back inside. Supper's ready when you are. Gideon started toward the barn. Mara followed, unsure what to say. Thank you, Gideon said finally. For today. For standing up when I wasn't sure if I should. You would have done it anyway. Maybe. But it felt better having someone in my corner. They stood in the barn doorway, the smell of hay and leather mixing with the cool evening air. Mara realized how close they were standing, realized Mrs. Brennan's warning carried more weight than she'd wanted to admit. I should check on the books, she said, stepping back. The books can wait. They're always waiting. That's the problem. She left before he could respond. Went to her room and sat by the window, watching the sun sink below the horizon. Watching her reflection in the glass and wondering who she was becoming. Someone strong. Someone capable. Someone who spoke up and didn't apologize for it. Someone her mother wouldn't recognize. Someone she wasn't entirely sure she recognized either. But for the first time in 21 years, Mara Whitlock felt like she was becoming exactly who she was supposed to be. And that terrified her more than anything else. The trouble started 2 weeks after Laramie, though Mara wouldn't connect the dots until later. It began small, a fence cut on the north pasture, 30 head of cattle wandering onto neighboring land. Jesse found them before they got far, chalked it up to weak wire and sloppy maintenance. Then supplies started disappearing from the barn. Nothing major. A coil of rope, some tools, a saddle blanket, the kind of things that could be misplaced or borrowed and forgotten. "Someone's stealing from us," Mara said, reviewing inventory in the office. Gideon looked up from the contract he was reading. "You sure?" "I'm always sure when it comes to numbers. We're missing items that were documented 3 weeks ago. Either they grew legs or someone took them." "Could be the hands." "Jesse, Thomas, and Red have been here longer than you have. They're not suddenly turning into thieves." Mara tapped her pencil against the ledger. "This started after Laramie. You think it's connected to Johnson? I think it's connected to us turning him down in front of half the territory. Men like that don't forget being embarrassed." Gideon leaned back in his chair, face thoughtful. "If it is Johnson, he's testing us, seeing if we'll notice, seeing if we'll react. So what do? We notice, we document, and we wait for him to make a bigger move. That's a terrible plan. You have a better one?" Mara didn't, so they waited. The bigger move came on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks later. Mara was in the office working through feed contracts when she heard shouting from the yard. She looked out the window and saw 2 men on horses she didn't recognize arguing with Jesse near the barn. By the time she got outside, Gideon was already there, hands loose at his sides in a way that suggested he was ready for things to go bad. "Don't care what your boss says," Jesse was saying, voice tight with anger. "You're on private property without permission. That's trespassing." One of the men, younger and cocky, grinned. "We're just delivering a message from Mr. Johnson. He wanted to let Mr. Cross know he's still interested in doing business. Thought maybe if he saw our operation up close, he'd reconsider." "Your operation?" Gideon's voice was dangerously calm. "That's right. Mr. Johnson's expanding, buying up land in this area. Thought you might want to sell before prices drop." "I'm not selling. That's a shame. Nice place like this. Be a real tragedy if something happened to it." The man's grin widened. "Accidents happen on ranches, fires, stampedes, equipment failures." Mara stepped forward before Gideon could respond. "Get off this property, now!" The man looked at her like she was an interesting bug. "You're the one from the auction, the mouthy girl. I'm the one telling you to leave before this becomes a legal problem instead of just a rude intrusion." "Legal problem," he laughed. "You going to file a complaint? Take us to court? By the time any of that happens, you might not have a ranch to fight over." Gideon moved so fast Mara barely saw it. One moment he was standing still. The next he had the man by the collar, yanking him half out of the saddle. "You listen to me," Gideon said, voice low and hard. "I don't care who sent you or what message you think you're delivering. You come on my land making threats, you're going to leave with more than bruised feelings. Understand?" The man's cockiness evaporated. "Let go of me." "When I'm done talking," Gideon's grip didn't loosen. "You tell Johnson I'm not selling. Not now, not ever. And if anything happens to my property or my people, I'm coming for him personally. We clear?" "Clear." Gideon released him. The man scrambled to right himself in the saddle, face red. His companion, who'd stayed quiet through the whole exchange, was already turning his horse around. They rode off fast, dust trailing behind them. Jesse spat in the dirt. "That's going to come back on us." "It already has," Mara said. "The missing supplies, the cut fence. That was them, or people working for them. So what do?" Gideon's jaw was tight. "We get ready." The next week felt like waiting for a storm you could see building on the horizon. Gideon doubled the night watch, had the hands patrol the property in shifts. Mara started sleeping lighter, waking at every sound. Mrs. Brennan kept a shotgun by the kitchen door and didn't bother pretending it was for show. "You should leave," Gideon said one evening when he found Mara still working in the office past midnight. "Leave where?" "Back to your family, to the trading post. This isn't your fight." I'm still working off my debt. The debt's paid. Has been for a month. He set a piece of paper on her desk. This is a receipt showing the full amount transferred to clear your family's obligation to Pritchard, dated 6 weeks ago. You're free to go whenever you want. Mara stared at the document. Her name, the amount, Gideon's signature. It was real. Why didn't you tell me? Because you were working and I needed the help. And because... He trailed off. Because what? Because I didn't want you to leave. The words hung in the air between them. Mara's heart did something complicated in her chest. That's not fair, she said quietly. I know. You should have told me. You're right. Gideon met her eyes. But I'm telling you now. The debt's cleared. You can leave tonight if you want. No hard feelings. I'll even escort you back personally, make sure you get there safe. Mara looked at the receipt again. Looked at the office she'd organized from chaos. Looked at Gideon, standing in the doorway with that expression she still couldn't quite read. I'm not leaving, she said. Mara, I'm not leaving because of a debt. I'm staying because this is my fight too. Johnson threatened me at that auction just as much as he threatened you, and I don't run from threats. This could get dangerous. It's already dangerous, and if you think I'm going to hide while you deal with it alone, you don't know me at all. Something shifted in Gideon's expression. Relief, maybe, or resignation. You're stubborn. You're just figuring that out now? He almost smiled. Get some sleep. If Johnson's going to move, it'll be soon. I want everyone sharp. He left. Mara sat alone in the office, holding the receipt that said she was free to go, free to walk away from whatever was coming. She folded it carefully and put it in her pocket. Then she went back to work. The attack came 3 nights later. Mara woke to the sound of cattle screaming, not lowing, screaming, the sound animals made when they were terrified and running blind. She grabbed her boots and was out the door before her brain fully caught up. The night was lit orange by fire. The barn was burning, flames climbing the walls and spreading to the roof. Cattle stampeded through broken fences, scattering into the darkness. And silhouetted against the firelight, Mara saw riders. 4 of them. Maybe 5. Moving through the chaos with purpose. Gideon was already in the yard shouting orders. Jesse and Thomas were trying to contain the cattle. Red was running toward the barn with buckets. Get the horses out, Gideon yelled at Red. Forget the building. Save the animals. One of the riders broke away from the others, heading toward the house. Mara saw the torch in his hand, saw his intention. She ran inside, grabbed the shotgun from the kitchen, and was back out before the rider reached the porch. She raised the gun and fired into the air. The blast echoed across the yard. The rider's horse spooked, throwing him sideways in the saddle. Next one goes through you, Mara shouted. The rider wheeled his horse around, torch still burning. For a moment they stared at each other across the fire-lit yard. Then he threw the torch at the house and rode off. The torch landed on the porch, flames catching on dry wood. Mara dropped the shotgun and grabbed the bucket Red had abandoned, threw water on the fire before it could spread, stomped out the embers with her boots. Her hands shook so badly she could barely hold the bucket. More gunfire cracked through the night. Mara turned and saw Gideon firing at the riders, driving them back. One went down, horse stumbling. The others scattered, disappearing into the darkness beyond the firelight. The barn was a total loss. They managed to get most of the horses out, but the structure itself collapsed inward with a groan of burning timber, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. The cattle were scattered across half the territory, and somewhere in the darkness, attackers were regrouping or running. Mara found Gideon by the water trough, reloading his rifle with mechanical precision. Are you hit? She asked. No, you? No. The house? Fire's out. Porch is damaged, but the structure's sound. He nodded once, still focused on the rifle. His hands were steady. Mara's were still shaking. I need you to do something, Gideon said. What? Take a horse, ride to town, get the territorial marshal. That's 30 miles. It'll be dawn before I get there. Then you'd better ride fast. What about you? I'm staying here, in case they come back. He finally looked at her. Mara, this is serious now. Someone could have died tonight. Someone still might. I need the law involved before this escalates into something worse. If I leave, you'll be down another person. If you stay and they come back in force, we'll all be dead. His voice gentled. Please, I need to know you're safe, and I need the marshal here before Johnson can cover his tracks. Mara wanted to argue, wanted to stay and fight, but she saw the logic in what he was saying, saw the fear underneath the calm exterior. All right, she said, but you stay alive until I get back. That's an order. Yes, ma'am. She took the fastest horse that wasn't spooked or injured, a gray gelding with good wind and better temperament. Mrs. Brennan pressed food into her hands, wrapped in cloth. Jesse gave her his rifle and ammunition. You know how to use this? Jesse asked. Point and shoot. How hard can it be? Harder than you think if you're not expecting the kick. Brace it against your shoulder, keep both eyes open, breathe out when you squeeze the trigger. Mara nodded, trying to remember everything. The night pressed close around the ranch, full of danger she couldn't see. She rode out as the first gray light of false dawn touched the eastern sky. Behind her, the barn burned down to embers. Ahead, 30 miles of open country and the hope that she could reach help before Johnson finished what he'd started. The ride was brutal. Mara had done long rides before, but never at this pace, never with this much fear driving her forward. The horse was game, pushing hard even when the sun came up and the temperature climbed. Mara stopped once to let the horse drink from a creek, gave him 10 minutes to rest, then pushed on. She reached town by early afternoon, dust-covered and exhausted. The marshal's office sat on Main Street, a small building with bars on the windows and a sign that had seen better days. Marshal Tom Hendricks was 50, gray-haired, with the kind of face that had stopped being surprised by human behavior sometime around 1870. He listened to Mara's story without interrupting, making notes on a pad of paper. Johnson's men did this? He asked when she finished. They're the only ones with motive. Gideon turned down a business deal, embarrassed Johnson in front of other ranchers. 2 weeks later, his property's being vandalized, and now it's burning. That's motive. It's not proof. Then come investigate. Look at the evidence. Talk to witnesses. Hendricks leaned back in his chair. Miss Whitlock, I appreciate you riding all this way, but I can't deputize a posse and ride out to arrest a man like Johnson on suspicion alone. I need evidence. Real evidence. The ranch is burning, and that's a tragedy. But property crimes don't give me jurisdiction to arrest without proof of who committed them. For all I know, Cross has enemies I don't know about. Or the fire was an accident and everyone's jumping to conclusions. Mara stared at him. You're not going to help. I'm saying I need more than accusations before I can act. Hendrick's expression softened slightly. I know you're upset, but law has procedures. I can't ignore them because you rode hard and asked nicely. So what am I supposed to do? Ride back and tell Gideon he's on his own? Tell him to document everything. Every incident, every threat, every piece of property damage. Build a case I can actually prosecute. That's how the law works. Mara stood, chair scraping against the floor. The law's useless. The law's slow. There's a difference. She left before she said something she'd regret. Outside, the town moved through its normal rhythms. People shopping, talking, going about their lives like the world wasn't burning 30 miles away. Mara stood on the boardwalk trying to think. She'd ridden all this way for nothing. The marshal wouldn't help without evidence they didn't have. By the time they built a case strong enough to prosecute, Johnson could have burned the ranch to the ground 3 times over. Miss Whitlock? She turned. A man stood behind her, well-dressed in a suit that looked expensive, even covered in trail dust. He was younger than Gideon, maybe mid-30s, with the kind of smooth face that suggested he didn't work outdoors. Do I know you? Mara asked. Not yet. My name's David Fletcher. I'm a federal marshal out of Cheyenne. He showed her a badge. I've been investigating land fraud in this territory for the past 6 months, and I've been very interested in a man named Johnson. Mara's exhaustion evaporated. How much have you heard? Enough. I was in Hendrick's office when you came in. He's right that he can't act without evidence, but federal jurisdiction is different. Fletcher's smile was thin. And I've been building a case against Johnson for crimes that make barn burning look tame. If what you're describing is connected to his larger operation, I can help. What kind of crimes? Land fraud, contract manipulation, intimidation. He's been running a scheme across 3 territories, finds struggling ranchers, offers to buy them out, then manufactures reasons to lower the price or seize the property entirely. When people refuse to sell, accidents happen, strange accidents. the kind that leave people desperate enough to accept his terms. That's what he's doing to Gideon. If I can prove it, I can stop him, but I need evidence. Witnesses willing to testify, documentation showing a pattern. Fletcher looked at her directly. You willing to help me build that case? What do I need to do? Tell me everything. Every interaction with Johnson, every threat, every incident, and then help me connect it to the other cases I'm working. They talked for an hour. Mara told him about the auction, the visitors making threats, the missing supplies, the barn fire. Fletcher took notes, asked detailed questions, cross-referenced everything with his existing files. This fits the pattern, he said finally. Johnson's escalating faster than usual, which means he's either desperate or emboldened. Either way, it makes him sloppy. And sloppy means catchable. How long will it take? To build a case that'll stick? Weeks? Maybe months? We don't have months. If he attacks again, then I'll be there to catch him in the act. Fletcher closed his notebook. I'm writing back with you. Tonight. With a federal warrant and the authority to arrest anyone caught committing crimes on Cross's property. If Johnson's men come back, we'll be ready. For the first time since the barn burned, Mara felt something like hope. They rode out at sunset, Fletcher and 2 deputies he'd telegraphed from Cheyenne. The ride back felt different, faster, sharper, charged with purpose. By the time they reached the ranch, it was past midnight. The moon hung low and fat over the horizon, casting everything in silver light. The ranch was dark except for lamplight in the house. Gideon met them in the yard, rifle in hand, expression going from wary to relieved when he saw Mara. You're back. With help, she gestured to Fletcher. This is Marshal David Fletcher, federal. He's been investigating Johnson. Gideon and Fletcher shook hands, sizing each other up the way men did when they weren't sure if they should trust each other yet. Your marshal in town wouldn't act, Fletcher said, but I can. I've got warrants for Johnson and known associates. If they show up here again, I have authority to arrest them on the spot. They already showed up, burned my barn, and scattered my cattle. Any casualties? No, but it was close. Fletcher nodded. We'll set up a perimeter. My deputies and I will take shifts watching the property. You have my word. If they come back, we'll be ready. They spent the rest of the night organizing defenses. Fletcher's deputies took positions around the property. Gideon, Jesse, and Thomas armed themselves and prepared for another attack. Mrs. Brennan moved through the house like a general preparing for siege, gathering supplies and making sure everyone was fed. Mara found herself in the office, unable to sleep, documenting everything that had happened. Every detail, every moment, building the case Fletcher needed. Gideon found her there an hour before dawn. You should rest, he said. So should you. I can't. He leaned against the doorframe. Keep thinking about how close it came, how easily someone could have died. But they didn't. This time. Next time might be different. Mara set down her pen. Then we make sure there isn't a next time. Fletcher arrests Johnson, the threats stop, we rebuild. You make it sound simple. It's not simple, but it's doable. She met his eyes. We didn't run. We didn't give up. That has to count for something. Gideon crossed the room, sat in the chair across from her desk. He looked exhausted, face lined with stress and lack of sleep. When you rode out yesterday, I thought I might not see you again, he said quietly. Thought maybe you'd get to town and just keep riding. Back to your family, somewhere safe. I thought about it, Mara admitted, for about 5 seconds. Then I remembered I'd never forgive myself if I ran and something happened to you. To me? Or to the ranch? Both, either. Does it matter? Yeah, it does. They looked at each other across the desk. The office was dim, lit only by a single lamp. Outside, the false dawn was starting to lighten the sky. I don't know what this is, Mara said. Between us. I don't know what I'm supposed to call it or how I'm supposed to feel about it. But I know I'm not running. Not from Johnson. Not from whatever happens next. Even if it gets worse before it gets better? Especially then. Gideon reached across the desk, took her hand. His palm was rough with calluses, warm against her skin. You're the strongest person I've ever met, he said. You know that? I'm just doing what needs doing. That phrase again. He smiled slightly. Someday you're going to do something just because you want to. And when you do, it's going to be terrifying and amazing. Maybe I already am. Are you? Mara squeezed his hand. I'm still here, aren't I? They sat like that as the sun came up, two people who'd found each other in the mess of violence and business and stubborn refusal to quit. Found something neither of them had been looking for, but both of them needed. The attack, when it came, happened fast. 3 days of quiet had made everyone tense. Fletcher's deputies rotated shifts. The ranch hands stayed armed. Mrs. Brennan kept watch from the kitchen window like a sentry. Then, on the fourth night, riders appeared. Not 4 or 5 this time. 10. Maybe more. Coming hard and fast from multiple directions. Mara was in the barn, the temporary structure they'd built to replace the one that burned, when she heard the first gunshots. She grabbed the rifle Jesse had given her and ran toward the house. Riders circled the property, firing at the windows, driving the defenders inside. One threw a torch at the new barn. Mara raised her rifle, braced it against her shoulder like Jesse had taught her, and fired. The recoil slammed into her shoulder hard enough to make her stumble. The rider jerked sideways but didn't fall. More gunfire erupted. Fletcher and his deputies returning fire from defensive positions. Gideon on the porch with his rifle, methodical and deadly. Jesse somewhere in the darkness, protecting the livestock. One rider broke away from the pack, heading straight for Mara. She fumbled with the rifle, trying to reload, hands shaking with adrenaline. The rider raised his gun. The shot came from her left. The rider went down, hoarse screaming. Mara turned and saw Mrs. Brennan standing in the kitchen doorway, shotgun smoking. "Get inside!" the older woman shouted. Mara ran, made it to the porch as another rider came around the corner of the house. Gideon shot him. The man fell. Inside, the house felt like a fortress under siege. Windows shattered. Bullets punched through walls. Fletcher's voice shouted orders, coordinating the defense. "They're trying to burn us out!" Thomas yelled from upstairs. "Let them try," Fletcher said. "We've got them outnumbered now." He was right. More riders appeared on the horizon, but these weren't attackers. These were Fletcher's reinforcements, called in from Cheyenne. Federal marshals with arrest warrants and the authority to use them. The attacking riders saw them coming and broke. Scattered, fled into the darkness. Fletcher's men pursued. Gunfire echoed across the valley. And then, slowly, silence. Mara sat on the floor of the front room, back against the wall, rifle across her lap. Her ears rang. Her shoulder throbbed where the rifle had kicked. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Gideon dropped down beside her. "You hit?" "No, you?" "No." They sat together in the wreckage of the house, surrounded by broken glass and bullet holes and the smell of gunpowder. Outside, Fletcher's men were rounding up the attackers who'd been caught, hauling them off horses, reading them their rights. Fletcher appeared in the doorway. "We got 7, including Johnson himself. Caught him trying to run." Gideon stood slowly. "He's here? In custody, along with enough evidence to put him away for a long time." Fletcher looked around the damaged house. "You folks all right?" "We're alive," Mara said. "That's more than I expected an hour ago." "It's over," Fletcher said. "Johnson's operation is done. The attack stopped tonight." But it didn't feel over. Not yet. Mara could still hear gunfire in her head, still feel the weight of the rifle, still see the rider coming at her with murder in his eyes. Gideon helped her to her feet. They walked outside together, surveying the damage by moonlight. The temporary barn had a new hole in the roof. Fences were down again. Bullet holes scarred the house, but they were standing. The ranch was standing. And somewhere in the darkness, Johnson was in chains. "We did it," Gideon said quietly. "We survived," Mara corrected. "That's not the same as winning." "Isn't it?" She thought about it. Thought about everything that had led to this moment, leaving the trading post, working off a debt that was already paid, standing up to buyers and threats and men with guns. Thought about who she'd been 6 months ago and who she was now. "Maybe," she said. "Maybe it is." They stood together as dawn broke over the Wyoming hills, two people who'd fought for something and refused to let it be taken. Who'd stood when others would have run. Who'd found strength in each other when everything else was falling apart. The woman who'd been invisible was invisible no longer, and the man who'd seen her when no one else did stood beside her as the sun came up on a new day. Damaged, but not broken. Tested, but not defeated. Ready for whatever came next. The legal proceedings took 3 months. 3 months of depositions and testimony, of lawyers arguing in territorial court while Mara and Gideon tried to rebuild what had been destroyed. Johnson fought every charge, hired expensive attorneys from Denver, tried to paint himself as a legitimate businessman being persecuted by jealous competitors. Fletcher demolished him piece by piece, hizo bien. The evidence was overwhelming once you knew where to look. Forged contracts. Intimidation documented in letters Johnson had been arrogant enough to keep. Testimony from a dozen ranchers who'd been squeezed the same way Gideon almost was. And the attack itself, 7 men caught in the act, 4 of them willing to testify against Johnson in exchange for reduced sentences. Mara sat in the courtroom for the verdict, Gideon beside her. The judge was an older man with no patience for theatrics, and when he read the guilty verdicts, all 15 counts, his voice was flat and final. Johnson got 20 years. His associates got less, but enough to matter. Outside the courthouse, reporters from 3 territories wanted statements. Mara let Gideon handle them while she stood on the steps, breathing in air that tasted like freedom. "How does it feel?" Fletcher asked, appearing beside her. "Like I can finally stop looking over my shoulder." "You did good work. The documentation you provided, the testimony, that's what sealed this." He offered his hand. "If you ever want to work in law enforcement, I'd hire you in a heartbeat." Mara shook his hand. "I'll keep that in mind." She wouldn't take him up on it, she knew that already. But it felt good to be asked. Felt good to be seen as someone capable of more than just keeping books and surviving. They rode back to the ranch that evening, arriving just as the sun touched the horizon. The damage from the attack had been repaired slowly over the past months. The barn was rebuilt, stronger than before. The house had new windows, patched walls, a fresh coat of paint on the porch where the torch had burned. It looked different now, harder, like something that had been tested and proven. Mrs. Brennan had supper waiting. Jesse, Thomas, and Red joined them, along with 2 new hands Gideon had hired to help with the expanding herd. The dining room was full, loud with conversation and the kind of easy comfort that came from people who'd survived something together. "To justice," Jesse said, raising his glass. "And to being too stubborn to quit." They drank. Mara felt the whiskey burn down her throat, warming her from the inside. Felt the weight of the past months settling into something manageable. After supper, she found herself in the office out of habit. The books were in perfect order now, she'd seen to that. Every account balanced, every contract filed properly. The chaos Gideon had lived with for years was gone, replaced by a system that actually worked. She was reviewing the quarterly numbers when Gideon knocked on the doorframe. "Working late again?" "Just checking something." He came in, closed the door behind him, sat in the chair across from her desk like he had that morning after the first attack. But this time there was no exhaustion in his face, no fear, just something that looked like determination mixed with nerves. "I need to talk to you," he said. Mara set down her pen. "That sounds serious." "It is." "Maybe." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd learned meant he was uncomfortable. "The 6 months are up. Have been for a while now. And I know you stayed because of Johnson, because of the fight, but that's over now." "I know. So I need to know what you're planning to do if you're going back to the trading post, back to your family." Mara had been avoiding this question for weeks, had been burying herself in work so she wouldn't have to answer it. But sitting here now, looking at Gideon across the desk in the office she'd made her own, she couldn't avoid it anymore. "I don't know," she said honestly. "My mother writes every week, says Clara's doing well, that the trading post is stable. They don't need me the way they used to. But you feel like you should go back anyway." "I feel like it's what I'm supposed to do. Duty, family, all of that." "That's not what I asked." Mara met his eyes. "No, it's not." Gideon leaned forward. "What do you want, Mara? Not what you're supposed to want, not what's responsible or dutiful or expected. What do you actually want?" The question hung in the air between them. Mara had spent her whole life not asking herself that question. Had spent 21 years doing what needed doing, being what people needed her to be, keeping everything from falling apart through sheer stubborn will. "I want to stay," she said quietly. "I want to keep working here. Keep building something that matters." "Just the work?" "No, not just the work." Gideon stood, walked around the desk. Mara's heart was doing complicated things in her chest, and she couldn't tell if it was fear or hope or both tangled together. "I'm not good at this," Gideon said. Talking about feelings, being vulnerable. It's not how I was raised. Join the club. He almost smiled. But I need to say this anyway, even if I mess it up. These past months, having you here, it's changed everything. Not just the ranch, me. The way I see things. The way I see myself. He paused, choosing words carefully. You're the strongest person I've ever met. The smartest. The most capable. And somewhere along the way, I stopped being able to imagine this place without you in it. Mara's throat felt tight. Gideon, let me finish. Please. He took a breath. I'm not asking you to stay because I need a bookkeeper. I'm asking you to stay because I need you. And I know that's selfish, and I know you've spent your whole life taking care of other people's needs, but I'm asking anyway. That's still not a question. You're right. He reached down, took her hand, pulled her to her feet. They stood close enough that Mara could feel the warmth of him, smell the leather and sage that always clung to his clothes. Marry me, Gideon said, not because it's convenient or practical or makes good business sense. Marry me because I love you, and I want to build a life with you, as equals, as partners, as whatever we decide to be. Mara's vision blurred. She wasn't crying, wouldn't let herself cry. But her eyes were doing something that felt dangerously close. You love me, she said. Yeah. Since when? Since you told off Johnson at the auction. Maybe before that. Hard to say exactly when it happened. His grip on her hand tightened. But I know I don't want to lose you, and I know if you go back to that trading post, I will. So I'm asking now, before you can talk yourself out of it. Marry me, Mara, please. She thought about the trading post, about her mother and Clara and the life that was waiting for her if she wanted it. Thought about being invisible again, being the backbone nobody thanked, fading back into the background while others took the spotlight. Then she thought about the ranch. About the office she'd organized and the books she'd fixed and the cattle auction where she'd stood up and refused to back down. Thought about firing a rifle at armed men and riding 30 miles for help and sitting in a courtroom watching justice get served. Thought about Gideon seeing her when nobody else did. Seeing her and choosing her. Not settling, not making do. Choosing. Yes, she said. Gideon's expression shifted from nervous to stunned. Yes? Yes. I'll marry you. I'll stay. I'll build this life with you. She squeezed his hand. But I have conditions. Of course you do. I want equal say in business decisions. Real equal. Not just you asking my opinion and then doing what you want anyway. Done. And I want my name on the deed. Legal ownership. This is our ranch, not yours with me as decoration. Already planned on it. And if we have children someday, they get raised knowing their mother is more than just someone who keeps house and looks pretty. Gideon pulled her closer. Our children are going to be terrified of how strong and smart their mother is. Trust me. Good. He kissed her then. It wasn't like the kisses in the romance novels Clara used to read, all flowery and perfect. It was awkward at first, both of them figuring out how this worked, bumping noses and laughing nervously. But then it settled into something that felt right. Real. Like everything else they'd built together. When they finally pulled apart, Mara was breathless, and Gideon was grinning like a fool. I should probably ask your mother's permission, he said. You probably should. She's going to say no. Why? Because you're too old for me, too rough around the edges, and you're taking away her unpaid labor. Mara smiled. I'm going to marry you anyway. Scandalous. I've been called worse. They stood in the office holding hands, making plans. They'd get married in town. Small ceremony. Nothing fancy. They'd write to Mara's family, invite them out if they wanted to come. They'd rebuild the ranch even stronger, expand the herd, maybe buy the neighboring property that had just gone up for sale. They'd build something that lasted. A week later, Mara rode back to the trading post. Not permanently, just to tell her mother in person, to pack up the few belongings she'd left behind, to say goodbye to the life she was choosing to leave. The trading post looked smaller than she remembered, shabby in a way she hadn't noticed before. Clara met her in the yard, and for a moment they just stared at each other. You look different, Clara said. I am different. Good different or bad different? I don't know yet. Maybe both. Inside, her mother was waiting. Elizabeth Whitlock looked older, more worn down, but there was something softer in her face too. something that might have been relief. "You're back," Elizabeth said, "just to visit and to tell you something." Mara took a breath. "I'm getting married. To Gideon Cross. I'm staying at the ranch." She'd expected anger, recrimination, the same disappointment she'd seen her whole life. What she got instead was silence. Then Elizabeth nodded slowly. "I thought you might. You're not going to fight me on this? Would it change anything if I did?" "No." "Then what's the point?" Elizabeth sat down heavily in her chair. "You were always going to leave. I knew that. Even when I tried to keep you here, tried to make you into what I needed, I knew you were too strong to stay." Let me finish." Elizabeth's voice was firm. "I wasn't a good mother to you. I see that now. I treated you like a tool instead of a daughter. Made you carry burdens that weren't yours to carry. And I'm sorry. I can't fix it, but I can say I'm sorry." Mara felt something crack open in her chest. "I didn't come here for an apology." "I know. But you're getting one anyway." Elizabeth looked up, eyes wet. "You saved us. This family, this business, everything. And I never thanked you properly. So I'm thanking you now, and I'm telling you to go live your life. Be happy. Don't waste time feeling guilty about leaving." Clara appeared in the doorway. "She's been practicing that speech for 3 days. "Clara," Elizabeth said sharply. Elizabeth, "What?" "It's true." Clara came over, hugged Mara tight. "I'm happy for you, really. Gideon seems like a good man, and you deserve someone who sees how amazing you are." "I'm not amazing." "You are. You're just too stubborn to notice." Clara pulled back. "Can I come visit? See the ranch?" "Of course, whenever you want." They spent the afternoon together, the three of them, talking about the trading post, about Clara's suitors. She'd turned down Thomas Johnson and 2 others, was holding out for someone who actually interested her, about the ranch and the trial and everything that had happened. It wasn't perfect. There were still awkward silences, still old hurts that didn't heal just because someone said sorry. But it was better, more honest. When Mara left the next morning, her mother hugged her goodbye. A real hug, not the stiff obligation of before. "Write to me," Elizabeth said. "Let me know how you're doing." "I will." "And Mara?" Elizabeth held her at arm's length. "I was wrong. About so many things. But mostly about you. You're not the one who needed fixing. I was." Mara didn't trust herself to speak, just nodded and climbed onto her horse. She rode back to the ranch with her few belongings and a feeling like something had been settled. Not resolved completely. Not perfect. But settled enough. The wedding happened 3 weeks later on a clear October morning. They stood in front of the territorial magistrate in town, Mara in a simple dress Mrs. Brennan had altered from something she'd had stored away, Gideon in a suit that made him look uncomfortable but handsome. Elizabeth and Clara had come. Jesse, Thomas, and Red stood as witnesses. Marshal Fletcher attended, along with a handful of other ranchers who'd testified against Johnson and respected what Gideon and Mara had done. The ceremony was short. No fancy words or elaborate promises, just the simple exchange of vows, the legal binding of 2 lives that had already been bound by everything they'd survived together. "Do you, Gideon Cross, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "And do you, Mara Whitlock, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Mara looked at Gideon, saw the man who'd given her a chance when she had nothing, who'd stood beside her when others would have run, who'd seen strength where everyone else saw invisibility. "I do." The magistrate pronounced them married. Gideon kissed her, and this time it wasn't awkward at all. They held a small reception at the ranch. Mrs. Brennan had prepared enough food to feed an army. Jesse played fiddle, badly but enthusiastically. People danced and drank and told stories about Johnson's trial and the night of the attack and everything that had led to this moment. Mara found herself standing on the porch at sunset, watching the celebration continue without her. Clara joined her, holding a glass of champagne someone had brought from Cheyenne. "You did it," Clara said. "Did what?" "Got out. Made something of yourself. Became someone people respect." Clara was quiet for a moment. "I used to be jealous of you. Did you know that?" "Of me? You were the pretty one, the one everyone wanted." "Everyone wanted to marry me. That's not the same as wanting me." Clara took a sip of champagne. "But you People wanted to know what you thought, wanted your opinion, respected your mind. I would have traded all the marriage proposals in the world for that. You still can. Can I? Why not? You're smart, capable. You've been running the trading post mostly by yourself for months now. Ma said so in her letters. Mara looked at her sister. Stop waiting for someone to give you permission to be more than decorative. Just be it. Clara smiled. When did you get so wise? I'm not wise. I'm just tired of watching people waste their potential because someone told them they couldn't. Inside, Gideon was telling a story that had everyone laughing. Mara watched him through the window. This man who'd become her husband, her partner, her equal. Watched the ranch hands who'd become family. Watched her mother talking to Mrs. Brennan like old friends. This was hers now, this life, this place, these people. She'd built it from nothing but stubborn will and refusal to quit, had fought for it, nearly died for it, and now it was hers to keep. Come on, Clara said, pulling her toward the door. They're about to cut the cake. The celebration went late into the night. When everyone finally left or settled into guest rooms, Mara and Gideon climbed the stairs to the bedroom they'd share. Their bedroom now. Not his, not hers. Theirs. Tired? Gideon asked. Exhausted. Want to just sleep? Yeah, is that all right? He pulled her close, kissed her forehead. Everything's all right. We've got time. They did have time. All the time in the world. Time to build the ranch bigger. Time to expand the business. Time to figure out this marriage thing and make mistakes and fix them. Time to become the people they were meant to be. Mara fell asleep in her husband's arms, listening to the Wyoming wind outside and feeling safer than she'd ever felt in her life. The next morning, she woke early out of habit, started to get up, planning to check the books or review contracts or do any of the 1,000 tasks that always needed doing. Gideon caught her hand. Where are you going? Work. It's your wedding day, the day after, technically. Take a morning off. But the ranch will survive without you for a few hours, trust me. He pulled her back down. Stay. Just for a little while. So she did. Stayed in bed with her husband as the sun came up, doing nothing productive, being nothing except exactly who she was. And for the first time in her life, Mara Whitlock, Mara Cross now, let herself just be. Let herself rest. Let herself be happy without feeling guilty about it. It felt strange and uncomfortable and absolutely right. Later, when they finally got up, Mara found a letter waiting on her desk in the office. Her mother's handwriting. She opened it carefully. The letter was short, just a few lines, but they mattered. Mara, I want you to have this. It was your grandmother's, given to her when she married. She told me to give it to you when you became a woman. I thought that meant when you married, but I was wrong. You became a woman long before any man put a ring on your finger. You became one the day you stopped asking permission and started taking what was yours. Your grandmother would be proud. So am I. With love, Mother. Inside the envelope was a silver bracelet, old and tarnished but beautiful. Mara slipped it onto her wrist. It fit perfectly. Gideon appeared in the doorway. What's that? Family heirloom, from my grandmother. It suits you. Mara looked at the bracelet, then at her husband, then at the office with its organized books and the window showing the ranch spreading out toward the horizon. This was her life now. Not perfect, not easy, but hers. Completely, utterly, undeniably hers. And she'd claimed every inch of it with her own 2 hands. The first year of marriage was harder than either of them expected. Not because they didn't love each other. That part was easy. Almost too easy. But because loving someone and building a life with them were 2 entirely different things, and nobody had bothered to mention how much work the second part required. They fought about money, about how much to reinvest in the ranch versus save for emergencies. Mara wanted a safety cushion large enough to survive another attack, another drought, another catastrophe. Gideon wanted to expand while the market was good, buy more land, grow the operation. We can't grow if we're too scared to take risks, he said one night after a particularly heated argument about purchasing the Henderson property. And we can't survive if we gamble everything on risks that don't pay off, Mara shot back. My father did that. It's why I'm here instead of there. I'm not your father. I know that, but the principle's the same. They eventually compromised. Bought half the Henderson land, saved the rest. Neither of them was completely happy with it, which Mrs. Brennan said was a sign they'd done it right. Marriage isn't about getting your way, the older woman said, kneading bread in the kitchen while Mara updated the household accounts. It's about both of you being equally annoyed at the solution. That's a terrible definition of marriage. And yet here we are, 30 years later, my husband and I still equally annoyed. Mrs. Brennan smiled. But still together. That counts for something. They fought about work, too. Mara had a habit of burying herself in the office when things got difficult, using paperwork as a shield against feelings she didn't want to examine. Gideon had a habit of disappearing into ranch work for days at a time, coming back exhausted and uncommunicative. You can't just shut down every time we have a disagreement, Mara said after he'd spent 3 days avoiding her by working dawn to midnight. I'm not shutting down. I'm working. You're hiding. That's rich coming from someone who spent 6 hours yesterday reorganizing files that were already organized. She didn't have a good answer for that. Because he was right. She did hide in work. Had been doing it her whole life. Learning not to hide took practice. Took sitting with uncomfortable feelings instead of running from them. Took saying, I'm scared, or I'm angry, or I don't know what I'm doing, instead of pretending everything was fine. It was the hardest thing Mara had ever done. Harder than standing up to Johnson. Harder than facing armed men. Harder than leaving her family. Being vulnerable with someone who could hurt you, that took a different kind of courage. But slowly, clumsily, they figured it out. Learned to fight fair. Learned to apologize when they were wrong and forgive when they were hurt. Learned that marriage wasn't about being perfect. It was about showing up imperfect and choosing each other anyway. The ranch prospered. The Henderson land proved valuable. Good grazing that let them expand the herd. Mara's financial systems kept them profitable even when market prices fluctuated. Gideon's instincts for livestock and land management paid off in ways that surprised even him. Other ranchers started coming to them for advice. How did you organize your books? What's your system for tracking expenses? How do you negotiate with buyers without getting cheated? Mara found herself teaching other ranch wives, and some ranchers themselves, the basics of bookkeeping and financial management. Started holding informal workshops in town once a month, showing people how to track their money properly. You're good at this, one woman said after a session. Teaching, I mean. Making complicated things make sense. I just break it down into pieces people can actually use. That's called being a good teacher. Mara had never thought of herself as a teacher, had never thought of herself as anything except someone doing what needed doing. But sitting in that town hall, watching people take notes and ask questions and actually understand concepts they'd been intimidated by before, that felt like something more than just work. That felt like building something that mattered. Clara visited 6 months after the wedding, staying for 2 weeks. She'd changed too. Carried herself differently. Spoke up more. Had opinions about things beyond dresses and marriage prospects. Ma's letting me handle more of the trading post business, Clara said one evening while she and Mara sat on the porch watching the sunset. The ordering, the contracts, the difficult customers. She says I'm good at it. You are good at it. You always were. You just never had the chance to show it. I was scared to try. Scared I'd mess up. Scared I wasn't smart enough. Clara glanced at her sister. But then I watched you build this whole life from nothing but stubbornness and refusal to quit. And I thought, if Mara can do that, maybe I can run a trading post without burning it down. You're smarter than you give yourself credit for. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just finally figuring out that being pretty isn't the same as being useless. Clara smiled. Either way, it feels good. Having people ask my opinion, being respected for more than just my face. Welcome to the club. It's a good club. They sat in comfortable silence, two sisters who'd spent years misunderstanding each other finally starting to see clearly. There's a man, Clara said eventually, at the trading post. He's a surveyor passing through, educated, kind. He looks at me like I'm interesting instead of just pretty. What's his name? Daniel Morrison. Clara's face did something soft. He asks me questions about the business, about what I think about things, and he actually listens to the answers. You should marry him. I barely know him. Then get to know him, but don't let him leave without figuring out if he's worth keeping. Mara looked at her sister. The good ones are rare, and they don't stay available forever. Clara married Daniel Morrison 8 months later. Mara and Gideon traveled back to the trading post for the wedding. It was bigger than Mara's had been, more elaborate, with half the town attending. Elizabeth had pulled out all the stops, determined to give her youngest daughter the wedding she deserved. But watching Clara at the altar, Mara realized her sister had something more valuable than an elaborate wedding. She had a partner who saw her, really saw her, the same way Gideon had seen Mara. After the ceremony, Elizabeth pulled Mara aside. "Thank you," her mother said quietly. "For what?" "For showing Clara that there's more than one way to be a woman, more than one kind of strength." Elizabeth's eyes were damp. "I failed you both, tried to make you into what I thought you should be instead of helping you become who you were meant to be. But you figured it out anyway, and you showed Clara how." "Ma, let me finish. I'm proud of you, of both of you, of the women you've become despite my best efforts to limit you." Elizabeth managed a smile. Your grandmother would have loved this. Watching her granddaughters become forces of nature. Mara hugged her mother. It still felt a little awkward, a little uncertain. Some wounds took more than apologies to heal, but they were trying. That was something. 2 years into the marriage, Mara realized she was pregnant. The discovery came with complicated feelings. Joy mixed with terror, hope tangled with fear of all the ways this could go wrong. She told Gideon on a Tuesday evening after supper. They were in the office going over contracts, and she just blurted it out between reviewing a feed order and discussing fence repairs. "I'm pregnant." Gideon stopped mid-sentence. "You're what?" "Pregnant. Going to have a baby. Due sometime in late spring, if I'm calculating right." He stared at her. Then his face split into the widest smile she'd ever seen. "We're having a baby." "That's generally what pregnant means, yes." He pulled her into his arms, careful suddenly, like she might break. "How are you feeling? Are you all right? Do you need to sit down?" "I'm fine. I'm not fragile." "I know, but still." They sat together on the office floor, backs against the desk, talking about all the things that needed doing. Converting the spare room into a nursery, buying baby supplies, figuring out how Mara would manage the books when she was caring for an infant. "We'll hire help," Gideon said, "someone to assist with the bookkeeping, and Mrs. Brennan knows everything about babies. We'll be fine." "You sound more confident than I feel." "That's because I'm not the one who has to actually grow and deliver a human being. I get the easy part." The easy part is everything that comes after. Raising a person, teaching them, keeping them alive and functional, and hopefully not terrible. We'll figure it out, same way we figured out everything else. The pregnancy was difficult. Mara was sick for months, could barely keep food down, spent more time exhausted than not. The books suffered. The ranch kept running, but barely, with Gideon juggling twice the work, and Mara frustrated that her body was betraying her when she needed it most. "This is ridiculous," she said one afternoon after spending an hour being sick. "How does anyone do this?" "By surviving," Mrs. Brennan said, bringing her tea and dry toast. "That's all you can do. Survive it, and come out the other side." "What if I'm terrible at it, at being a mother?" "Then you'll be terrible at it the same way every other mother is terrible at it. Nobody knows what they're doing. We're all just pretending and hoping the children don't notice." That's not reassuring. It's not meant to be. It's meant to be true. The baby came in April, a girl with Gideon's dark hair and Mara's stubborn expression. Labor lasted 18 hours and nearly killed her. Mrs. Brennan and the doctor from town handled the delivery while Gideon paced outside, useless and terrified. When it was over, when the baby was cleaned and wrapped and placed in Mara's arms, the exhaustion and pain faded into something else, something huge and overwhelming and terrifying in its intensity. "She's perfect," Gideon whispered, touching the baby's tiny hand. "She's not perfect. Look, her nose is crooked." "It's not crooked, it's characterful." "That's the same thing." They named her Sarah after Gideon's mother, Sarah Cross, who came into the world fighting and never really stopped. Motherhood was harder than running a ranch, harder than standing up to Johnson, harder than anything Mara had ever attempted. The baby needed constant attention, constant care, constant everything. Mara couldn't bury herself in work to avoid difficult feelings because the feelings were right there, screaming at 3 in the morning and refusing to be ignored. She was terrible at it at first, couldn't get the baby to nurse properly, couldn't figure out why she was crying, couldn't do anything right. "I'm failing at this," she told Mrs. Brennan one night after Sarah had been screaming for 2 hours straight. "You're not failing, you're learning. There's a difference." It doesn't feel different. It will, eventually. Mrs. Brennan took the baby, walked her around the kitchen with practiced ease. Sarah quieted almost immediately. See, sometimes she just needs a different person. Doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. Just means she's fussy and you're tired. Slowly, painfully, Mara learned. Learned to read Sarah's different cries, learned when to push through exhaustion and when to ask for help. Learned that being a good mother didn't mean being perfect. It meant showing up tired and frustrated and doing your best anyway, just like everything else. Sarah grew, learned to walk, to talk, to argue with the determination of someone who'd inherited both parents' stubbornness. She had Mara's mind for numbers and Gideon's instinct for animals. By the time she was 5, she was helping with ranch accounts, counting cattle, asking questions that made the adults think. She's going to be trouble, Jessie said one afternoon, watching Sarah organize the tack room with ruthless efficiency. She already is trouble, Mara replied. She gets it from her father. The hell she does, that's all you. Mara couldn't argue with that. The ranch continued to grow. They bought more land, expanded into horse breeding alongside cattle, built a reputation for honest dealing and quality livestock that spread across 3 territories. People came from hundreds of miles away to buy from Cross Ranch, knowing they'd get fair prices and straight answers. Mara's bookkeeping workshops turned into something bigger. She started writing articles for agricultural journals about financial management for ranchers, started getting invited to speak at cattlemen's associations and farming conferences, started building a reputation that had nothing to do with being Gideon Cross's wife and everything to do with being Mara Cross, the woman who could make complicated financial concepts make sense to people who'd never finished school. "You're famous," Gideon said one evening, reading a letter from a ranchers' association in Montana asking Mara to speak at their annual meeting. "I'm not famous. I'm just useful. You can be both." She went to Montana, spoke to a room full of ranchers about cost management and profit margins and how to negotiate without getting cheated, got a standing ovation, got 3 more speaking invitations before she even left the building. "How does it feel?" Gideon asked when she returned. "Strange. Good. Scary." Mara sat on their bed, pulling off her boots. "Like I'm becoming someone I didn't know I could be." "You've always been that person. The world's just finally catching up." Years passed. Sarah grew into a teenager who could out-argue most adults and outride most ranch hands. She wanted to go to college, study business and agriculture, come back and run the ranch someday. Wanted to do everything and refused to apologize for wanting it. "She reminds me of you," Elizabeth said during one of her visits. The older woman was in her 70s now, mostly retired with Clara running the trading post alongside Daniel. "She's more ambitious than I ever was." "No, she just has permission to be ambitious. You never did." Elizabeth watched her granddaughter through the window, organizing the ranch hands for the day's work with the authority of someone twice her age. "You gave her that, the permission to be everything she's capable of. I just didn't tell her she couldn't. That's all it takes sometimes, not crushing someone's spirit before they're strong enough to fight back." Mara thought about that, about all the ways her mother had tried to crush her spirit and all the ways she'd fought back anyway, about the invisible girl she'd been and the woman she'd become, about the legacy she was building without even meaning to, the reputation, the respect, the ranch that bore her name as much as Gideon's, the daughter who would inherit not just property, but the knowledge that women could be strong and smart and powerful without apology. That was worth more than money, more than land, more than anything she could have imagined that day she'd stood in the trading post stockroom, tallying up debts and feeling invisible. Gideon was 63 when he died. Heart attack, quick and brutal, no warning. He was checking fences on the north pasture and just didn't come back. Jessie found him lying in the grass, gone before he hit the ground. The grief nearly destroyed Mara. They'd had 25 years together, built a life, a legacy, a love that had sustained her through everything. And suddenly he was just gone, leaving a hole so big she couldn't see around it. Sarah held her while she cried. Sarah, who was 22 now, college-educated and capable, and so much like both her parents, it hurt to look at her sometimes. "What do I do?" Mara asked her daughter. "You survive, same as you always have." "I don't know if I can." "Yes, you do. You're the strongest person I know." "I'm not strong. I'm just stubborn." "That's the same thing. You taught me that." The funeral was enormous. Ranchers from across 3 territories came to pay respects. People Mara had taught at her workshops. People Gideon had dealt with honestly over the years. The territorial governor attended. Even Marshal Fletcher, retired now but still sharp, made the trip. "He was a good man," Fletcher said to Mara after the service. "One of the best I've known." "He was the best I've known." "What will you do now with the ranch?" Mara looked out at the property. The land they'd built together. The empire carved from wilderness through work and will and refusal to quit. "I'm going to run it," she said. "Same as I've been doing. Same as I'll keep doing until I can't anymore." "Alone?" "I'm not alone. I've got Sarah. I've got the ranch hands. I've got everyone who helped build this place." She met Fletcher's eyes. "And I've got myself. That's enough." It was enough. Barely. Some days. But enough. She ran the ranch for another 15 years, expanded it even more, brought in new techniques, new breeds, new ways of doing business, made Cross Ranch the standard by which other ranches measured themselves, made her name legendary not because she'd married someone important, but because she'd become someone important in her own right. Sarah took over when Mara was 78, her hands too arthritic to hold a pen properly anymore, her eyes too weak to see the ledgers she'd kept perfect for half a century. "I'll keep it running the way you did," Sarah promised. "No. Run it the way you need to. Times change. Business changes. Don't try to preserve some perfect memory. Build something new." "You sound like grandmother." "Your grandmother was smarter than she got credit for. Took me too long to see it. Mara died at 81, in her sleep, in the bedroom she'd shared with Gideon for a quarter century. Died surrounded by grandchildren she'd taught to be stubborn and strong and unapologetic about their ambitions. The funeral was even bigger than Gideon's. The territorial governor, a different one now, younger, gave a speech about how Mara Cross had changed ranching in the West, made it more professional, more sustainable, more accessible to people who'd been shut out before. Women came from 3 states to pay respects. Women Mara had taught. Women who'd built businesses using principles she'd shared. Women who'd learned that being smart and capable and strong wasn't something to hide or apologize for. "She showed us it was possible," one woman said to Sarah at the reception. "Being more than what people expected. Building something that mattered. She proved we could do it." Sarah stood in the ranch house, her house now, surrounded by her mother's legacy. The book still organized according to Mara's system. The business still run on principles Mara had established. The name Cross Ranch known from Montana to Texas, synonymous with quality and honesty and strength. But the real legacy wasn't the ranch, wasn't the money or the land or the reputation. The real legacy was in all the women who'd learned they didn't have to be invisible, who'd learned that strength wasn't something to apologize for, who'd learned that being seen and being powerful and being unapologetically themselves was not just possible, but necessary. Mara Whitlock had been invisible once. The girl nobody saw, the backbone nobody thanked, the strength nobody acknowledged. But Mara Cross had become impossible to ignore, had built a life so large and loud and undeniable that her name became legend. Not because she was perfect, not because she never failed, but because she kept showing up, kept fighting, kept refusing to disappear, even when disappearing would have been easier. She'd taught her daughter that lesson, and her daughter taught it to her daughters, and they taught it to theirs. And the ripples of that one stubborn woman's refusal to stay invisible spread outward, touching lives she'd never meet, changing a world she'd never see. Because that's what happens when you choose to be seen, when you choose to be strong, when you choose yourself instead of settling for what others have decided you deserve. You change everything, not all at once, not perfectly, not without pain or fear or doubt, but completely, irreversibly, forever. And maybe that's all any of us can hope for, to live so fully, so honestly, so stubbornly ourselves that the world has no choice but to make room for us, to carve out a space where none existed before, to be remembered not for beauty or perfection or pleasing others, but for strength and courage and the refusal to be anything less than everything we're capable of becoming. That was Mara's legacy. That was her gift to the world. And long after the ranch was sold, after the land was divided, after the buildings crumbled and the ledgers turned to dust, that gift remained. In every woman who chose to be seen, in every person who refused to stay invisible, in every stubborn, brave, imperfect soul who looked at the world and said, I am here. I matter. And I will not disappear to make you comfortable. That was the story of Mara Cross. And it was far from over. Because the best stories never really end. They just change shape, becoming part of the stories that come after. Becoming thread in a tapestry so large no single person can see all of it, but every thread matters. Every voice counts. Every choice to be seen instead of invisible ripples outward forever. Mara Whitlock had been one thread, one voice, one choice. But what a thread it was. What a voice. What a choice. And in the end, that was enough, more than enough. It was everything.